let's get started this evening. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar. For those of you I haven't had the opportunity to meet, my name is Joanne Frederick. I am one of the co-founders of Stop MPRP, Inc., and I'm currently serving as the president of the board of directors. And we are bringing this information to you tonight. We wanted to give you a quick update on the organization and what we're doing. And then we're going to introduce Harris Eisenstein here, who will talk to you for the vast majority of the time this evening. But I do recognize that some folks out there are learning of this project, have learned of this project recently. And I want to acknowledge how upsetting this is that we could be facing this. And really our job here is to provide you as much information as we can in the best way that we can and reassure everyone out there that we are in this together. We founded this organization to fight this project, and there are hundreds of volunteers and folks working in that regard. So if you leave this meeting with nothing else, please know that we're here, we're together, and we're fighting with every single thing we've got and more to stop the destruction of our farms and homes and land across these three counties. So quick disclaimer, this is educational and informational. It is not meant to be legal advice. And we will publish some of these slides and potentially the entire webinar at the end of this meeting. So I would ask you not to record and wait for us to release the official recording when we're done. And if you have media inquiries, etc., you can reach us at media.stopmprp.org. So with that, we have a lot to cover. And I want to turn off my phone, which is now ringing. So we will have an opportunity for Q&A. We have a ton of Q&A that we received in advance. So thank all of you, many thanks to all of you for issuing those questions in advance. We are not going to get to all of those questions tonight. We are going to focus our questions on those topics that are really relevant to Harris Eisenstein and the topic of eminent domain. And the team and I are working on holding another webinar sometime next week to kind of get to the rest of the questions. Just know we're working as fast as we can to get all of everyone's concerns addressed. For tonight, when we get there, please submit your questions via the Q&A, not the chat. And that you should see that at the bottom of your screen, Q&A with a little square and a question in it. So if you have questions at that point, that's how you do that. Okay, so let me give you a couple of updates. As many folks know, PSEG released the final proposed route late last week. We learned of it first thing Friday morning, and you see that route here on the page. Just to level set everyone, the Maryland Piedmont Reliability Project, MPRP, is a 70-mile long electrical transmission line determined to be needed by PJM, who is the Regional Transmission Organization, or RTO. That contract was awarded by PJM to PSEG to construct this line. And the route will almost exclusively be built on private land, including conserved land, farms, homes, etc. The question we get asked very often is, why aren't they using existing transmission lines? And PJM made the decision to award the contract to PSEG, who doesn't own any transmission lines in Maryland. And they have not yet entered into or talked with BG&E about the possibility of using BGE's existing right-of-way across these three counties. Obviously, we have lots of questions and concerns about that, but that's sort of the status of where we are right now. So this transmission line will be 500,000 volts, which is more than 2 times powerful than most of the transmission lines we see across these three counties today. The larger the load, one can reason the larger the negative impacts of those loads. And they're going to cause significant destruction. We expect the easements to be 150 feet wide, which, if you can imagine in your mind, that's about 3 trailers of a tractor trailer from end to end. So it'll be pretty significant destruction across the 3 counties. And my family's farm is impacted as well. It'll take about 4.5 acres of conserved forest out of the farm here. So we're all, again, in this fight together, and we all have a lot at stake. So what happens now? We're here this evening, gathered together. We're up to 172 folks have joined us this evening, and again, really appreciate that. So kind of the schedule from here is PSEG will submit an application to the Maryland Public Service Commission. That application is called a Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity, or CPCN. PSEG originally said they plan to submit that application by the end of the year, though they've now since acknowledged it might slip into early 2025. A couple of things to keep in mind. PSEG is not a Maryland utility and does not currently have the authority to use eminent domain to take your land. They must first get approval and a permit from the Maryland Public Service Commission. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important that we continue that outreach campaign to including the Maryland Public Service Commission in opposition, and we will continue to share more about that. There are 3 public meetings coming up hosted by PSEG to provide information about this project to impacted and affected folks across the 3 counties. You can see the schedule for those meetings, November 12th, 13th, and 14th, one in each of the counties. We'll provide additional information and addresses on those meetings. We have provided those in our email updates, but we'll continue to provide that information. We strongly encourage everyone to attend as many, if not all of those meetings as you can. I will be there. Our legion of volunteers and supporters will be there as well. And the extent of our ability to show up and say no will strengthen our ability to stop this project. So I think it's important that we stick together, lock arms, and are all certain in our opposition to this project and continue to work together. So once that certificate of, there's a timeline that's dictated by the Maryland law, and there's a summary of that here. So PSEG must hold a minimum of 1 public meeting, and we know that they have 3 scheduled, and they must hold these meetings at least 60 days prior to filing their CPCN permit. So we have assumed that the 60-day clock started on October 17th. PSEG held a press conference with media on the evening of the 17th at some point. We were not invited, but we're going to assume for the sake of our planning here that the 60-day clock started on the 17th of October. So their application for the CPCN can't happen any sooner than December 17th. And again, they've said that it might actually go into 2025. From that point on, a lot of things will happen. So there are hearings, a law judge could get established, etc. We will be providing additional information on what happens once that CPCN is filed. But I want folks to know that there's no urgency right now to worry about that filing and what happens, because there will be plenty of hearings. And we had a meeting earlier this afternoon with one of our attorneys, and she said it could be a year for that entire process at the Maryland Public Service Commission to work its way through. So we will be ready, but I want folks to know, particularly going into the holiday season, that there is no need to have outsized worry going into the holiday season, that's going to happen on the 17th, and we must be ready to file as an intervener, et cetera, as soon as possible. Plenty more communications coming, plenty more education coming, but tonight we really wanted to focus on, excuse me, what would happen if we get to the worst, which would be eminent domain at some point in the future. Again, completely don't expect that, completely working to stop that, but wanted to do our best to educate everybody on that process. And that's why we're here tonight. So what are we doing? Every time I have an opportunity to speak to folks, I am so awed by the outpouring of support and the work that so many of you across these 3 counties and even broader than that are doing to stop this project. It is the best possible thing that has come of this terrible situation is the way this community has stood up and is standing up for each other. And I am so grateful to each of you and so proud of all of you for doing this work. The organization we started is a brand new organization, began in July of 2024, really as a nonpartisan organization, grassroots, volunteer driven. We're an all volunteer organization. We organized as a 501c4 organization so we could enroll members, which we are and have, and we can do significant lobbying efforts, which we are and have. So please go to stopmprp.com. We ask everyone to join as a member, even if you're not on the route. If you're not adjacent to the route, if you're just a concerned citizen, you are absolutely eligible to join as a member. And the strength of this organization strengthens our ability to stop the permit being awarded at the Maryland Public Service Commission. So share with your friends, share with your family, share with concerned citizens all across the state. Know that our membership fees are $10 for an individual, $15 for a family. We purposefully kept them affordable so we can get as many folks as members as possible. There are a whole other slew of things going on. We're appearing at events. We are engaging with elected officials at the federal, state, and county level. We're doing media interviews, talking to experts, including many of the volunteers that are working here at our side, who are environmental experts and real estate experts and agricultural experts, et cetera, power experts, electrical engineers, retired FERC professionals, et cetera. So again, kudos to everyone for standing up. We are working on legal action. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a second. And then really working to make sure this doesn't happen again. So we're in this terrible situation now, and many of us, all of us, feel very threatened by this, but it is stopping this project and then getting the laws and regulations in place to make sure that we don't face a similar fight in the future. We do know PJM is planning the next set of projects. So we want to have them off at the pass and never be surprised by something like this again. So the amazing group of volunteers in our advocacy and outreach committee created this Just Say No campaign. And we have folks going door to door over the next couple of days or week, because there are folks that aren't on social media and maybe aren't on email. And we want to make sure everyone understands your rights to say no to PSEG, regardless of what they say to you. They have no right to ask you to sign anything on behalf of an easement unless and until they get a permit by the Maryland Public Service Commission. So this Just Say No campaign is, you can go to our website and you can print this, you can share it with your friends, we've emailed it, you can forward it to everyone, you can share it on social media. We encourage everyone to have this document and to continue to talk to your friends, neighbors, relatives, etc., on the route, near the route, and even off the route about what our rights are as landowners here across these 3 counties. We will have additional campaigns coming out soon. So remember, just say no. If your property is on the proposed final route, again, mine is, you will receive a letter from PSEG that asks you to negotiate an easement. And we have Harris here to talk about that. Again, don't have to engage. You can politely tell them you're not interested in having conversations. You can tell them they cannot come on your land. Just because you get a letter doesn't mean they've got permission to do that. So you are absolutely within your rights to say, thank you, no thank you, please go away. Don't sign anything at this point in time is our advice. And Harris will talk more about that in a moment or two. We've created a landowner resource hub on our website to give folks the tools and the information that you need. We know, trust us, I know how upsetting this is. And it is a difficult concept to wrap your head around that a private company out of New Jersey could come in and take our land. So remember, stick together, go to this resource hub, get the information you need, and make sure you, even if you don't join as a member, sign up for our email updates, because we're pushing out email, again, gosh, to credit to a whole host of folks. We're pushing out email updates every day on what you can do and what you should know and how this works, et cetera, et cetera. So we're really working hard to bring the community together and give you all the information you need to protect yourselves and each other. I'll go here in a second, but what we're driving toward is zero easements, zero compromise. And we believe that if PSEG must go to the Maryland Public Service Commission and say, we didn't get any easement agreements, that will weaken their ability to claim that they really need this project. So it will require fortitude of all of us to not give in to whatever crazy demands they make. And know that there are many implications relative to these easement agreements. There could be mortgage implications, there could be property tax implications, there could be insurance implications. So we want to make sure that we're arming folks with as much information as possible. Harris is an expert, he can talk about some of those things, but just know that PSEG will make it sound like this is great, I'm going to write you a big check and put it in your bank account, but know that there are many other implications to that. And we just want to say no easements, zero compromise going into this filing for the permit at the Public Service Commission. Okay, let's talk about legal representation. Stop MPRP has engaged 2 law firms at this point. Valerio Mazza is a DC-based law firm that specializes in government contracting. And we're looking at different strategies for legal action at the federal level. I just had a meeting today from 4 to 5 on some of those. We'll be publishing additional information to the greatest extent possible. Again, we don't want to show our hand to the opposition, but we will be sharing some additional information about those options. I am encouraged that we have some strong opportunity there at the federal level. Secondarily, we've engaged Carolyn Elephant, who is an expert in these types of cases, and she'll represent the organization at the Maryland Public Service Commission. So we had Valerio Mazza and Carolyn on the phone a couple of hours ago, and we've talked about those strategies together, and we have a whole host of things. We will be coming out to our Legion of Volunteers with some research projects and getting some data organized, et cetera, so we can minimize the legal expense to attorneys and really use this, amazing group of folks we have here gathered tonight and many more elsewhere to help us do some of the legwork so we can use our donated and membership fees most judiciously. And really not on this page, but we also have engaged Atlantic Group Strategies, which is helping us from a government relations perspective. They're the ones that were able to secure for us all of the meetings at the federal congressional level 2 or 3 weeks ago. And we're actively working with the Maryland delegation and the 3 counties on those kinds of opportunities. I really want to shout out to several folks on the Maryland delegation. I know there are folks working on some very important legislation, and there are several senators and delegates who are working very hard for all of us here to help us stop this and help us stop this from happening in the future. So just immense gratitude to those elected officials that have stood up across the board here and are working on our behalf. And this will be a very active legislative session starting in January in 2025. I know you'll all be following along, but I think we'll see a lot of activity in this regard. So I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to turn this over to Harris in just a moment. I will tell you that what Harris is going to talk about is if eminent domain happens, here's how to protect your rights. And for some of us, that might be hard to hear because we are all firmly working towards it's never going to happen. We will not get to that point. We will stop this before we get there. But I wanted us to plan for the worst. I wanted to give folks information and context in case that worst happens. So at least you have resources. At least you understand the process. At least you understand a good legal advice on what should and shouldn't happen. But just know, as hard as this might be to hear in pieces, it is in no way an indication that we have given up, that we are going to give up, or that we're going to let this happen. We're going to fight with everything we have all the way through this process. And then if the most terrible outcome happens, we want to make sure everyone's got the right resources and the right contacts to best represent your rights as we go into that worst case scenario, which we are not giving up. I want to be super clear. So with that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Harris Eisenstein. He's a partner with Rosenberg Martin and Green in Baltimore City. I chatted with Harris, I think 2 weeks ago, had great advice and counsel. I think that he'll be able to provide some insight and ideas to all the folks on this call. And hopefully, Harris, I hate to say this, but I hope we never need you, my friend. I hope we are successful before we get to that point. But if we do, I wanted folks to be able to hear from you directly. So thank you for joining us. I really appreciate you donating your time for this effort.
Of course. Joanne, thanks for the warm introduction. It's nice to meet everybody. I see there's a big crowd here, so I'm going to try to keep my remarks relatively brief and answer as many questions as I can. Just one point of observation, the group at Stop MPRP is doing a fantastic job. They are experts in stopping this project. And again, receive this information session not as individualized legal advice, just in the spirit of general remarks, and also not as stopping the effort to stop the project, but instead keeping you all informed. And I think it's fantastic. So as Joanne mentioned, I'm a partner at the law firm Rosenberg Martin Greenberg. We're a full service, about 40 attorney firm that's headquartered in Baltimore. My focus is litigation, and most of my practice is focused on the value of real property. Essentially, parties fighting about how much property is worth. I love this area of the law. Anybody that I work with would tell you that I'm sort of obsessed with it. And in a setting like this, I'm really not one to boast, but I think it's important I share a couple of war stories so you understand if you end up needing counsel, who you'd get in me. I've handled some of the largest property value cases in the state of Maryland. I've handled many of modest value as well. The engagements run the gamut. Recent engagement involved the value of MGM National Harbor, which is the single highest valued property in the state of Maryland. It's valued in excess of $1 billion, and I represented Prince George's County in a 3-day trial last summer about the value, and it was a big success for my client. I'm currently, coincidentally, representing Anne Arundel County in the value of 2 power plants, Brandon Shores and H.A. Wagner. The reason I say coincidentally is because these plants perhaps are going to close in the next couple of years, and that might be part of the rationale behind the power line project. In the eminent domain space, I've represented a number of people. A recent win was representing the owners of a shopping center in Frederick called the Westview Promenade. Some of you might be familiar. Recently, last couple of years, the state put in a bike lane. And in that process, they tried to shortchange my client on compensation, and I secured about 5 times the state's initial offer for my client. More recently, I represented the owner of a flower shop in Baltimore County. The state, in the eminent domain context, took the sidewalk that separated my client's flower shop from Harford Road, a busy intersection, Harford and Joppa. Some of you might be familiar with that. Put the building essentially on the edge of Harford Road and said it wasn't much damage, it's no problem. They offered about $30,000, and they ended up paying around 7 times that initial offer. Now, we're not here to talk about those experiences, but I thought putting that in context so you all can understand, some past successes. We're here to talk about this project. Everybody's very familiar with this project. And whether it will advance is still very much an open question. The opposition is fierce, it's effective, and I really hope it succeeds. But if the project goes forward, it will be an enormous undertaking. Cost estimates approach nearly $500 million. That includes the cost of construction, but it also includes the cost of acquiring land necessary to advance the project, and that is where I would come in. Eminent domain is right now very much in flux. PSEG does not have that power. They will get that power if the project gets a green light. And what it means is what eminent domain means is the condemning authority, PSEG, could acquire private property for some public use. And it's rooted in the 5th Amendment. what it says is the pertinent provision, private property cannot be taken for public use without just compensation. So if somebody's taking your land, they have to pay you just compensation. That's what the fight's about. I take tremendous pride in getting my clients just compensation when a third party swoops in to take their land. I only represent property owners against condemning authorities. It's essentially this David versus Goliath situation. The condemnor has endless resources. They're taking private land, and they almost always make a lowball offer. The scale is tipped in their favor. When I come in, the first thing I do is try to rebalance the scale. I show the condemnor we're going to fight, that they must comply with the law, and ultimately force them to pay full value. This is how I spend my days. I represent people in the position that you might find yourself in. I hope you don't. Every day, they're faced with significant and sometimes life-altering challenges of somebody taking their land. They didn't ask for the project. They certainly didn't ask for their land to be co-opted in support of the project. But my role is to protect your interests. And I'm going to sort of focus now on this project. Again, we're pre-condemnation. We're pre-eminent domain. The preliminary step would be to intercede even while the Public Service Commission process plays out. PSEG is mounting a tremendous pressure campaign. Perhaps some of you have even seen it. They're using scare tactics on the need for the project. They're claiming that without the project, the state will suffer widespread blackouts and brownouts. And they're using similar scare tactics, so I understand, when it comes to taking your land. Remember, they need some or all of your land to advance the project. And they want you to agree to favorable terms today for multiple reasons. First, the obvious, the better the deal is for them, the more money they save. But the second point, and Joanne mentioned this, and she's absolutely right, they want to acquire as much land along the preferred route as possible without exercising eminent domain. That will make for a much easier public messaging, including at the Public Service Commission. Engaging with me, even at this early stage, would force PSEG to work through me. They would only communicate with me. You wouldn't have to worry about this aggressive acquisition campaign. No letters to you demanding that you entertain offers. Certainly nobody showing up at your house, God forbid, with a check and a false narrative around the value of your land. My fear is that for any of you, PSEG knocks on your door. They say, listen, we just want a sliver of your 20-acre farm. You don't use it. You haven't been there in years, and we'll give you $27,000 for it. And the premise is it's a very limited impact. And so $27,000 is found money. That sounds great. Go buy yourself a car. Years later, you learn, once the project is built, that the sliver that they acquired actually disrupts your entire farm. And the price they paid is 10 times is a fraction, 5% of what they should have paid. That's what can happen. If I'm involved, they're going to deal with me and my team on day one. They're going to know you can't be exploited. If they make offers, great. We can deal with those as they come in. We don't have to do anything. To Joanne's point, tell them to pound sand. I'm happy to do that. If you want to negotiate a deal, I'm happy to do that too. But there's absolutely no obligation for you to do anything at this time. At some point in time, if they get the power of eminent domain, then the conversation might shift. But I don't want anybody being bullied. Nobody. Now, the final piece of this sort of puzzle, this building of value to maximize your return, that's really my area of expertise. I'm not in the fight on the front lines with Stop MPRP to try to stop the project. But if they force you to sell some or all of your land, that's still a very, very much a big if. My goal, my number one goal, is to make sure that they pay fair and full value for your land. As I said earlier, the law requires that PSEG pay just compensation. But PSEG is a business. They want to minimize their expenses in any way possible. And this includes paying less than the law requires. Now, I don't know anybody's individual circumstance. I don't know how PSEG's acquisition will specifically affect your property or its value. But I guarantee you that they will not offer full value out of the gate. Guarantee it. We'll make sure they ultimately pay a fair number. And how do we accomplish this? Right? So in a normal situation where you have a condemnor that has eminent domain authority, PSEG doesn't have that yet, but in a normal situation, we leverage our experience. We build a team to contest value. The team will include lawyers, appraisers, engineers, land planners, and other professionals to develop your position. And we use that intel to get the condemning authority to ante up, just as the law requires, just as the law is intended. When we come in, and I'm going to censor this, but they'll have the proverbial oh no moment, right? They can't intimidate, they can't bully, they're not going to get these below market deals. They have to face now an experienced legal and expert team. And secondarily, and this is an important piece in the eminent domain context that some people, overlook, but we'll make sure that the acquisition includes standard non-economic terms. PSEG is very likely to claim that its project will have no impact beyond the physical boundaries of the land that it's taking. There's going to be no noise or pollution or vibration or other damage to, what we call the remainder land. In the hypothetical of a 20-acre parcel and they're taking an acre, the 19 acres are going to be just fine. Well, the project is years from completion and nobody's got a crystal ball. And we'll make sure that if PSEG's representations prove false, you will have recourse. Now, what will it look like to work with us? I am confident that we'll be able to convince PSEG to pay top dollar for any portion of your land it tries to take. We understand what they pay is incredibly important to you and your families. It's very important to us. You can probably tell I'm pretty passionate about it. But if you work with us, here's how the engagement will function. There are two options. I'm not sure how many of you have worked with lawyers before. The standard option is an hourly engagement at our standard rates. Very comfortable, happy to do that. But I also recognize that some on the call might prefer to avoid a running legal expense. And so we can engage on what we call a contingency basis. In that sphere, we charge a very modest upfront fee to essentially investigate your case. Tell PSEG, as I said a couple minutes ago, all communications run through us. Don't talk to my client. Don't bother them. Don't make them offers. Don't try to extort them. We'll set that up. And then beyond that, our legal fee is entirely contingent on success, meaning we only get paid if you get more than what they initially offered for your property. And we have no idea what they're going to offer. We don't even know whether the project is going to move forward. But if it does, and assuming they offer, let's say, $50,000 for a portion of your land, if we convince them to pay more than 50, our fee is a percentage of that upside. And it's generally sort of a scaled percentage depending on how far the case goes. Now, there's one component of an engagement that you all ought to be aware of. And even in a contingency arrangement, it's out-of-pocket expenses. As I mentioned, building a team, the primary component of the team, other than lawyers, is an expert, predominantly an appraiser. They can be expensive, but they are wildly critical to success. Without an expert, we won't get material movement in terms of compensation, and they can't work on contingency. So an engagement will require the payment of expert costs. You'd have an opportunity to sign off on the expert and approve their expenses. And if there's a personal circumstance that makes it challenging to handle an expert expense, we can deal with that on a case-to-case basis. Now, one final point before I open this up to questions, and I know there are a lot of questions. The old adage, strength in numbers, really applies here. The more owners along the route, assuming that the route goes forward, but the more owners along the route that engage with my firm, the more leverage each of you will have. In that circumstance, PSEG will be negotiating with me as counsel to theoretically dozens or maybe hundreds of affected landowners. We would have a huge bargaining chip. And while every property is unique and the project will absolutely affect each property in a different way, we'll develop common theories and valuation themes. For instance, we might quantify the adverse effect of replacing your current view, which is maybe of mature trees and beautiful landscaping, with unsightly power lines. If we convince PSEG to accept the theory for one of you, there's much better odds that PSEG will accept it for all of you. We'll also be able to leverage economies of scale with our experts with this out-of-pocket cost. If they're intimately familiar with the project, they'll provide a much better quality work product at, frankly, a better price. So that's the background. I hope I've not terrified anybody. That was not my intent. And I will open it up to questions now. I know there's probably a bunch. Just remember, I've not had a chance to review anybody's property. I don't know how it's going to affect you individually. But if you have general questions, I am very happy to answer them.
Okay, Betsy, are we?
Yep, we're ready for questions. Sorry, I was getting myself unmuted there. Just had too many buttons to push. Harris, one question we are receiving quite a bit actually is, are folks who are not directly on the path, but are still like in sight line or are feeling like they're going to be impacted by it, but may not be requested an easement from PSEG, is there any recourse for those folks, or is it only those who actually are directly going to have their properties impacted with the line itself?
Yeah, so that's, I hate this answer. This is a classic lawyer answer, but that depends. And it depends on the type of impact and whether there's actually a diminution in value to your property, right? If the power line, let's say, I mean, Joanne mentioned that there's a portion of her property that's probably going to be affected. If the neighbor is close to the property and the power lines are buzzing and hissing and there's vibration and there's serious issues and you own a house and we can make a case that there's a diminution in value to the property of an adjacent owner. Sure, we present that case, but it is more likely that everybody that's actually on the route that's going to be dealing with PSEG's offers are going to be the ones that are going to be receiving the compensation. But it depends.
I'll add, oh, I'm muted. Am I muted?
No, you're not muted. You're good.
Okay.
And you're on camera.
Okay.
We're
All
all
right,
on
perfect.
camera.
Yeah. Okay. So I will add that one of the legislative strategies we have been talking to our elected officials about is, should there be compensation for view shed impact going forward? So can't promise that something like that would get proposed or even happen, but it is on our list of legislative strategies that we feel are important, because speaking for myself, my brother is next door and his view would be certainly impacted from the project. So we are exploring possibilities in that regard to give Harris more items to fight for.
Well, I'll ask another question, then Allison, I'll turn it to you. Do you know, would PSEG have to reimburse for any legal fees or expenses associated if the property owner were to win, or is that, just wondering if that's how that works?
I thought you said Allison, but the answer
No,
is
I'm sorry, Harris, that's for you. I saw Allison about to ask a question.
No,
so
no.
I was beating her to the punch. Sorry,
Yeah,
Allison.
the answer, and it's an incredibly frustrating answer, the answer is actually no. In Maryland, the way that it works in Maryland, state court and also federally, the way that it works is, unless you're able to defeat the condemnation within the condemnation lawsuit, meaning it doesn't go forward, they can't accomplish it, then you can't recover your fees. You can't recover your fees, legal, you can't recover your expert expenses. It's totally absurd. I don't agree with it. Frankly, I had a conversation with somebody around changing that just today. But that's the law.
As it stands today, also on our list of potential strategies to have the General Assembly consider.
Right. And to my point earlier about David versus Goliath, right? You have Goliath, who has endless resources, and I don't know the financial circumstance of anybody on this call, but they're essentially suing you to acquire your property. That's how it works. They file a lawsuit. That shouldn't be scary. The lawsuit's just the very beginning. It doesn't mean you lost. That's the beginning. But they file a lawsuit and say, come defend yourself. And unless you're a lawyer or you're around lawyers, or somebody like me, it's going to be a scary circumstance, right? This whole idea is scary. Like, how much are they going to pay me? What do they need to take? And what's going to be the end effect to my property? So it makes no sense to me that they wouldn't provide you with the ammunition to get people like me or other lawyers that do this work to help you. But to Joanne's point, as it stands right now, maybe that'll change, but as it stands right now, legal fees and expert fees are not recoverable.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask next one of the questions that came in ahead of time. If this project gets pushed through, what should we be including in the compensation negotiation aside from lost land and crop values?
Well, so there are two concepts, right? The value of the land that's taken and the diminution in value to the remainder of your land. So going back to the 20-acre parcel where they're taking that corner for 27 grand, right? That concept. If that's exactly what's happening here, they're going to value the physical boundary of the land area that they are taking, right? And if it's an easement or it's fee simple or whatever they do, they're going to value it. But they're probably not going to recognize any value to the balance of your property, the remainder land. What would you still continue to own both before and after? But acquiring a piece of your property might change, for instance, the highest and best use of your property, right? I saw a question in advance where there's an opportunity, or there's a thought that the power line might run right through the middle of somebody's property, right? And it might run right near your house, might run right over your house. I don't know. And so that they might not acknowledge in the initial compensation discussion an effect on the value of the improvements. They might say, all right, well, the land is worth X an acre. We're acquiring a fraction of an acre, so we'll pay you a fraction of X. The reality is that the effect is much greater. So it's a great question. I would recommend that in this process, if you're going in this process, that I know it's an expense that some people would try to avoid. The reason I gave some of the examples earlier of successes, I mean, all of my eminent domain cases have been successes like that. I'm always deriving significant amount of additional value. That's why the contingency is only value add, right? If they offer you $1 and you only get $1, I don't get paid. If they offer you $1 and I get you $1 million, then I get paid. I think we're going to get closer to $1 million than $1.
So if somebody tells PSEG that, or sends a signed letter to PSEG and any of their agents or representatives saying they're not permitted to enter their property, kind of like a no trespass notification, but then they are approached and PSEG approaches them and comes onto their land, do they have recourse? Do they ask them to leave? Are they allowed to prosecute? What does that look like?
Well, so I'm not a criminal lawyer. Thankfully, I have no interest in that sense. But I mean, in a very general sense, yeah, nobody can come on your private property without your consent. I wouldn't take any aggressive action if that happens. And part of my thought around some of these stresses, right? What happens if somebody shows up and they want to walk my property and they want to send an appraiser out there and they want to do these things? That's where you put me in the way, right? And you say, deal with Harris. I don't have to talk to you. I don't have to deal with you. You're not my problem, right? Because I do imagine that over the next couple of months, even while the PSC process is ongoing, PSEG is going to be aggressive in trying to capture as much property as they can. So when they go before the PSC, they're able to say, well, yeah, it's a 70-mile project, but of the 70 miles, we already have rights to 71% of the land that we need. So we don't even need to acquire that much land by eminent domain. Everybody voluntarily sold it to us or conveyed easement rights or whatever it is. And that would probably mean that those deals were done below market value.
Which is why just say no. Just say no. That is why that is so important for everyone to just tell them, thanks, no thanks, leave my property. Just say no.
Allison, do you have a question lined up?
I do, yeah. So next, we have another question. Can you legally prevent PSEG and their subcontractors from entering or flying drones over your property before they receive approval?
From flying drones over your property, entering your property, the answer is yes. From flying drones over your property, the
We
answer
can
is
get
I don't
back
know.
to folks on that answer
Yeah,
if we want, Harris.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
That's okay. I'll ask one, and then Allison, I'll turn to you again. If I guess someone's asking about if the PSEG project is greenlit, is it better to pursue like a class action suit, or do people need to fight them individually? People want to understand the difference there.
Yeah, and Joanne and I talked about this the other day. So because every property is inherently unique, right? Everybody's going to have a different circumstance. you're not going to be able to present it as a class action. We might be able to, if we end up having to litigate these to trial, we might be able to find some commonalities and consolidation, but generally these are handled on a case-by-case basis. So, you know, Betsy's property, maybe it's similar to Joanne's, but, you know, there's no, we wouldn't litigate them together. And a class action essentially is that everybody's on all fours, everybody has sort of the same style impact. And I would want to give you all an opportunity to maximize your own individual return, right? There are going to be unique issues with each of your properties. Maybe some of you have income producing properties and some of you use it for residential property. Some of you perhaps own property that are using it for residential, but it has flexible zoning and it could be put to a better economic use. And that's how we would value your property. And that's how we would ask Amtrak to, ask PSEG to pay. The reason I said Amtrak is I'm representing a number of folks on Amtrak's tunnel project under the city of Baltimore. So Freudian slip.
All right, another question for you. So people are looking for some clarification. So if this does go through, they get eminent domain ability, do they get to own that piece of property, or they only own a right of way or an easement?
Well, so you know, I might actually kick this question to Joanne because I don't know. I don't know what they're trying to acquire, right? A lot of this conversation was about easements. I suspect it's going to be a combination of easements and fee simple acquisitions. And some of those easements are going to be on a temporary basis. Some of them are going to be on a permanent basis. Obviously, a fee simple acquisition is title to your property. So, you know, in a regular eminent domain context, there's fee simple acquisition of land. There's the acquisition of the improvements to the land, which includes, you know, landscaping, but also buildings. And there are permanent easements and there are temporary easements, so construction easements. So if it's going to take them years to build a project, they might only need to acquire in fee simple, you know, 1/10 of your land, but they might need for the period of construction more of your land, and they'd have to pay for that right.
Yeah, so we do believe they're going to just outright offer to buy property, and I believe in one of their communications it said, "Hey, if you're just interested in selling your property, call us and we'll sell it to you." Again, that's a victory for them. So we certainly encourage folks to not sell their property, and certainly not before you know, again, the worst happens, because that gives them another kind of marker on their side of the fence here. And we want them to go to the PSC with 0 easements and 0 rights to property and 0 ownership, etc. So I think this is really a game in waiting to see. Will they ultimately end up acquiring some pieces of property? If again, the worst happens, possibly. But let's not give them that opportunity.
Allison, do you have a question ready to go? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. So we got another question as well, wondering if there is any chance the first offer that people receive is going to be their best offer.
Never say never, but it is very unlikely, because, geez, I'm going to say this and just try to be incredibly blunt. They're hoping that people are foolish. They're hoping that people are ignorant and people don't lawyer up. They don't use the resources that they have, and they just say, "All right, you know, I'll take the 10 grand or whatever it is." But the reality is that the value of the property is probably significantly more. I've actually never been involved in an eminent domain case where the end result was the first offer.
It was always higher, just to be
Always,
clear.
yeah,
Okay.
always higher. Never lower.
There you go. That's exactly.
I was seeing some questions about, you know, folks have some concerns regarding health impacts and things like that from these types of transmission lines. Is that anything that is able to be taken into account when doing these kinds of negotiations? I think folks are just wondering if there's any recourse at all for some of that health concern that might be associated.
Yeah, so in an eminent domain context, they pay for the value of the real property. And so, I remember I said before we can develop common themes, and perhaps we could leverage those common themes among multiple property owners. That's one of them, right? That the effect of this power line might be grave. And as a result of that, the market for the properties that are impacted by the power line is less than the regular market, right? Before, like today, I don't know, Joanne's property is worth $50. But when the power line is on the property with its potential risk, to include not only the obvious risk, the noise and the vibration and the disturbance of an otherwise tranquil space, but instead, these unknown harms, to the extent we can quantify them, that there is no market, right? No longer could she sell her property for $50. Nobody would take it. And those are themes that we can advance, but generally, if somebody does suffer harm, right, somebody's hospitalized as a result of the project, that's a separate claim. That's a separate personal injury claim.
Thank you. And another question I'm seeing is folks are asking about how, if Harris, like how would they receive, or how will they ever know what PSEG's initial offer would have been if they're not speaking with them? Will PSEG send them a letter typically with an offer? Like, I mean, I know you were saying they should just say, talk to Harris, don't speak to them, but people are wondering, well, how will we know what PSEG is even offering if we don't speak to them?
So you're saying in a circumstance where someone engages with me before they get an initial offer?
I think either way, if they say, no, I don't want to talk to you, PSEG,
right?
And because that's what we're all telling them to say.
Yeah.
And they'll say, well, how would we ever know what that initial offer would have been if we're not willing to talk to them?
So two ways. They're going to ignore you when you tell them no, and they're going to continue to send you correspondence and perhaps show up at your house. Or if you engage with me, they're going to do that with me. So at some point in time, they're going to show their hand, right? And they're probably going to support their hand with an appraisal or something that is close to an appraisal that suggests what the value is. So that's pre-eminent domain. If they get eminent domain power, there's typically a period of time of negotiation prior to the filing of a lawsuit. And in that period, I mean, at that time, you would want to engage, right? When we know eminent domain is going to happen, they're your enemy, but also your friend, right? Because you have to communicate with them, right? And you have to try to engage with them, but you don't really want any of this to happen, right? And that's why it's easier to have somebody that's disinterested, like a lawyer, who doesn't have the personal connection to the property and instead has the background in terms of creating additional value. So at some point in time, whether it's now through using me or on your own, or down the road, if there is the right of eminent domain, that offer will be conveyed. And if you ignore it the entire time, you don't engage with them and negotiate, you don't, even when they have the right to condemn, you don't get involved, and they file a lawsuit, that will tell you what they're offering.
Thank you. We have a couple more minutes for questions. Allison, do you have one lined up by chance? If not,
So I will say, while Allison's looking there, we have a ton of questions we received in advance, and there are more coming in, and we will not get to all of them. We will do our best to kind of coalesce them and get them back out either in another webinar or in writing. I know folks have so many questions, and we're we're trying to do everything we can to get them answered to the best of our ability. So we could stay here for hours potentially. And do know that we will be at this PSEG hosted meetings, and we'll be available to chat with folks, etc. And as I said at the beginning, we're looking at hosting additional webinars in the next coming weeks so we can continue to bring people together and try to get folks the information they need.
Great.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, I'm not sure what was on the screen when I was speaking, but I should have. Okay, so I think Betsy showed there's a QR code where you can put in some information and get it to me. The reason that I'm doing that is because, to the extent you've not worked with a lawyer before, I have to run conflicts to make sure that we're not adverse to you and I can actually represent you. But to the extent that you want to talk to me about your individual circumstance, something specific to your property, and figure out what an engagement would look like, please don't hesitate to reach out. You could also just email me. My email's on my webpage, or call. But I'm going to need to do that like initial screening to make sure that there's no conflict. I can't imagine that there would be, but that's just part of intake.
And Harris, I just shared in the chat a link to your form. So anyone,
great.
I'm putting back up on the screen the QR code too, so that anyone who wants to connect directly with Harris, you can either take a shot of the QR code or click the link that's now in the chat. Okay.
And can I make one other comment? Because
go ahead. Of
I
course.
forgot to say it, but it's important. Joanne and team are on the front line trying to stop the project. Another way that the project gets changed or stopped is presenting aggressive positions on value, right? If this becomes wildly expensive for PSEG, more expensive than they've budgeted, more than the $500 million, right? They have, I don't know, 200 million for acquisitions, and it ends up looking like they're going to pay 5 times that. It might cause them to either reroute the project, to reconsider how they're going to conduct the project, or to acquire less land or different land, or in different locations within specific territory. And so those are all things that regularly happen in an eminent domain case, right? Originally they predict they're going to acquire property and it's going to encroach on a parcel that's leased to McDonald's. And when I convey to them that doing that is going to result in them cutting a check for $6 million, they say, well, wait a minute, we're not going to go on McDonald's parcel anymore. That happens all the time. And those are sort of learned experiences that I have along the way. So I imagine people probably have those questions, but those are things that we can try to work through. I can't guarantee that. If PSEG wants to pay, as much as we can extract from them, then they will. But they might, they're a business, and they might consider reconsidering the route.
Right, they're in this to make money, and they stand to make a great deal of money. So at the very least, let's not give them that opportunity. Stick together, say no, and make them walk away and say, we had no idea what we were facing when we walked into Maryland. We better go back to New Jersey and stick to what we know. Okay.
So,
we're at time, Betsy.
We're running low on time. I think Joanne will let you take it back over. And Harris, thank you again.
Sure,
yeah, Harris, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with folks today. And again, thanks to all the folks that are here. I think at the max we had like 190 people here. And I know that all of us wish we were doing something other than sitting here talking about this threat. But do know, what you can do now is on the screen. Go to our landowner hub, become a member, write to the Maryland Public Service Commission and say, oppose this project, cancel this project. It is not wanted, not needed. And know that we are a very strong organization based on each and every one of you, and we are going to fight this. I am going to fight this. All the volunteers, all the members are going to fight this until the bitter end. And I have faith and hope that we will be successful. And really, it is in large credit to each of you for being here and standing together. If you need anything, you know how to reach us. Email, on social media. We'll have additional webinars. We'll be getting out additional communications on if you have ideas and strategies. We'll be talking about what will happen at the PSC and if more people should be interveners. There's a lot of information coming your way, but we wanted to get this out today so we could have this initial conversation. And please know that we're all together. Just say no. We're stronger when we say no, and stay tuned until our next opportunity to be together. Thank you all. Have a good evening.